Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond. Welcome to another edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK. I am Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Matthew Fairburn, also of The Athletic. He covers your Buffalo Bills. And Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Manufacturing. He is here also to talk about the Western New York sports landscape. And quite a bit to talk about for mid-March. The Sabres are still god-awful, but the Bills have made some news. And we also have some college basketball to discuss. St. Bonaventure advancing to the NCAA tournament. University of Buffalo going to the NIT in a, pretty disappointing display in the Mid-American Conference Championship game against Ohio University over the weekend. We'll get into that with Jonah in a little bit, but let's stick with the Bills to top off the show. I saw it trumpeted in a local headline that the Bills have won free agency. And while re-signing guard Jon Feliciano, tackle Daryl Williams, and linebacker Matt Milano was something that Bills fans didn't think was entirely possible, I think there was a common held belief out there that the Bills were going to lose one or two of those players. Nevertheless, some local perspective is that the Bills have won free agency. I think that's open for discussion, and I want to start off with that topic. The premise, I think, is flawed because the Bills got crushed in the AFC Championship game. They did not enter free agency trying to stay the same. They know they need to get better. Brandon Beane said so in his postseason wrap-up news conference. So did Sean McDermott. And to say that the Bills have gotten better, I think at best they've treaded water so far. Free agency is still a ways to go, but clearly to say they've won it already, when to make these three moves that they've made so far, they needed to cut wide receiver John Brown, defensive lineman Quentin Jefferson, and we now have heard that they're not going to be able to re-sign Pro Bowl kick returner Andre Roberts, who has found a new home. It doesn't seem as though the Bills have gotten better yet. I don't want to downplay it, but planting flags after signing Jon Feliciano seems a bit premature, fellas.
Yeah, a little bit. I think the offensive line was a spot that seemed to be an area of relative concern entering the offseason because they, both Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane spoke about the need to be better in the running game. And Brandon Beane said it wasn't the running backs, and there's only, so many factors that go into the running game. So they're betting on continuity being the ingredient on the offensive line that'll help them, get better there going forward. I think as much as, like you said, there was a belief that they wouldn't be able to bring back all three of those free agents, I think there was also a fair amount of discussion, debate over whether it was necessary to bring back all three of them. Bringing them all back is one thing, but like you said, does it make them better? At best, makes them right about where they were. Now, they have the draft to add some pieces to this roster, presumably at least a few of those guys will make an immediate impact if they hit on some of those picks. And I think they're also banking on later in free agency or a few days into free agency, getting some of these cheap veterans that everybody seems to think will be out there because the market's been flooded with cap casualties and the cap has shrunk and players might be looking to take 1-year deals and maybe they can plug some holes that way. And they've brought the band back and they hope they can make another run. But, simply, declaring it a win after bringing back 3 guys that were already on a team that got handled pretty convincingly in the AFC Championship game by a team that lost in the Super Bowl. And that roster the Bills had in that season the Bills had, they had a lot of things go right because Brandon Beane also acknowledged at the end of the year 500 points probably isn't realistic again because of everything that went right health-wise, schedule-wise for them. So he kind of already hinted how fortunate they were to play as well as they did on offense or to score as many points, get the results they got. And now they've dedicated a good chunk of their resources to making sure that same group comes back. And probably, it's early, so we'll see what the market dictates and what all is out there for the Bills to pounce on here. They have some room to make a few moves. And if they're right about, some cheaper deals being available and they can hit on those, then, they'll have a chance to upgrade. But I wonder that hasn't happened yet. So we'll see, when free agency opens, it's sort of technically open now. Legal tampering started at noon. So, we should get an idea in the next week or so what value there is to be had in the second and third waves.
I think it's kind of a dumb premise overall to evaluate who wins and loses in free agency, even though you see a lot of that because everybody's starting from a different point on the track. It's kind of like grading the draft, and the teams that have the highest picks and the most picks tend to do better in the draft than the teams that have the fewest picks and the least picks. So I think you could spin it both ways. I think the Bills have done pretty well in the cap situation they were in, being able to sign Matt Milano and the key players that they wanted to bring back, renegotiate certain deals, extend Micah Hyde. It seems like they've done what they've wanted to do. They brought back the players they value, and the players that they're letting go, either they didn't value them as players or they didn't value their contracts. And I think that's a good position for the Bills to be in that they've drafted well enough and done well enough in previous free agency that they like their roster. And we've always talked about teams, or people talk about teams, the successful teams don't rely on free agency. They don't need to overspend in free agency for certain, to plug holes or to bring in star power to sell tickets. I think it's nice that that's not in the discussion for the Bills anymore. So while I wouldn't really categorize it as a win or lose because it's not a game, I do think the Bills have done well in free agency. I like that they did bring back players on the offensive line that seemed to, they had an up and down year on the offensive line, but I think by the end of the year, they found their best 5 and they were confident in the group they had. At least Josh Allen seemed to like the 5 guys that were blocking for him, and they seem to be bringing that unit back, and continuity is always a good thing at that position. One way I think the Bills lost in this game that's beyond their control was that they did, if the cap wasn't going to go down this year, they did have this window of adding to the roster before you have to pay your quarterback big money, and that's sort of closed now that the cap went down, and they might be extending Josh Allen's contract a little bit early. So there was some opportunity cost that beyond their control went away. And I think that they're in a position where I don't think they can make this roster too much better in free agency. They have to hope that the draft or internal development is how this team gets better.
And we saw what Dak Prescott got paid. So Josh Allen is going to get a heavy duty contract. Now, we don't know what the salary cap's going to be, but it sounds like with the rumblings that we're hearing in regards to the NFL's upcoming renewed broadcast deals, that the numbers are going to be handsome enough that there's going to be a lot of room under a big cap at some point. And that's going to be necessary if you're going to want to pay Josh Allen market value, to say the least. And the market value changes. So next year, if Josh Allen has a season anything like the season he just had, Dak Prescott money isn't going to be enough he's going to be making a lot more than $40 million a year, which sounds obscene, but that's what the market is setting. I will say though, Jonah, yes, the draft, they can find some players in the draft. And you mentioned them drafting well, but they haven't drafted that well at the front end of the draft. I mean, you have Cody Ford now is clearly a backup, I think, in this unit. Hudson Fairburn, not so sure of that. He wants to see Cody Ford get in there.
Brandon Bean did say that he envisions Cody Ford as a starter somewhere on this line. So I think if they rolled the ball out tomorrow, he is a starter because
Where?
Left guard,
Left
probably.
guard.
Ike
But
Bucker,
drafting your left guard, what 3 years into his career, you've used an early pick on a left guard.
which would be fine if he were a really good left guard. But I think at the moment you can't say that definitively. And they've talked about the injuries that he's dealt with and, everything along those lines that has, hampered him, and the position changes, which is their own doing. They're the ones who were indecisive about where he would play and wanting to see him at right tackle to justify that investment. But I've got no problem with him as a guard, as a second round pick, if he's a really good guard. But if he's not, then, that could be a problem. And if you spend time figuring that out, that's also a problem. Ike Bucker is a restricted free agent. They haven't tendered him yet. He started a lot, and the line seemed to come together a little bit when he started at left guard. So, yeah, Cody Ford, I think, is a huge question mark. Saying that
They like Ryan Bates.
they do like Ryan Bates. He's probably a center / tackle. So, that he's maybe still a year away now from cracking the starting lineup. There were ways for them to make this line better and, spend the money differently. And they chose not to do it. They got Mitch Morse to agree to a pay cut. They got Feliciano back. I don't know what the cap hit is yet, but it's a healthy contract. He got paid pretty well, not crazy money, but Daryl Williams, pretty significant deal. These are deals they can get out of after a couple of years, but it's still limiting your options in the short term. And so there's people are saying, well, Cody Ford, Deion Dawkins, Mitch Morse, Jon Feliciano, and Daryl Williams didn't play one single snap together in 2020, which is accurate. But if Cody Ford isn't that good, then I'm not sure that matters. So, I think they could have upgraded on the interior of their offensive line. They still have time to do it. But now it's a question of, if you do spend those early round picks on offensive linemen in the first 3 rounds, where are they playing and when? How soon are they playing? And, then, there's only so many snaps to go around. So, yeah, Cody Ford at the moment, probably a starter. Should he be? I don't know. That's to be determined. And can they find somebody better? I'd have to think they should at least try, because I think most people would say that the offensive line wasn't quite good enough. It wasn't a massive weakness, but it was a problem in the title game.
Is it possible, Matt and Jonah, that we misread Brandon Bean when he said that the running backs were not the problem to the ground game issues that the Bills had? We assumed that meant the offensive line. And now here Brandon Bean has re-signed his two offensive linemen that he wanted, that were set to hit the open market, and Daryl Williams and Jon Feliciano. So what's left? Is it the play caller, Brian Dable?
Yeah, I think there are variables, right? And I sort of read it that way partially, from the beginning, was like this idea. I think a lot of the messaging during the season was, and even from Brian Dable himself, was, if we were a running team, we would run the ball. Like, they're so good at throwing the ball that perhaps part of the issue with running the ball is the lack of commitment to running the ball. Brian Dable mentioned a lack of practice time on it because they knew they'd be a passing team. I think there's some of those variables, commitment issues up front, maybe scheme issues potentially, but yeah, it clearly was not a direct shot at the offensive line, which we probably should have known because Brandon Beane's not necessarily the one to take a direct shot at an entire position group. And clearly it wasn't taken that way by the players because they came back and, at less than market value deals, but frankly, we'll never know that because they're kind of guessing the market. The Bills are at this point. The market has not been established, and the market got screwed up because of the cap. So,
yeah, the players are guessing too, and they might be in a situation where it's easy to rationalize being happy in a place that you're familiar with, because if you do go out there and look around, by the time you're done looking, maybe your position's been filled by Brandon Beane. Maybe, what's the risk of going out there and finding out that the grass isn't greener because the salary cap this year doesn't allow it. Not because you're not worth it, because in just your bad timing that your contract happens to be up in a weird year in the NFL. So there is a bit more of a gamble involved for the player this year than in other years where you just assume the rates are always going up regardless of your position. Inflation allows me to get a raise and for somebody to fight over me. But I don't think teams are willing to fight or to overspend. Maybe a pass rusher with JJ Watt and Shaq Barrett coming off the market the way that they did. Maybe a team that's desperate for a pass rusher would be more itchy to overspend to make sure that they get one, which leads me to the other issue, the other question mark that the Bills had. Does this mean with them running out of money to spend or salary cap space that the Bills pass rush is back to 2020? Is it Jerry Hughes and AJ Epinesa? What are we looking at now?
I could see that being a position or what do you want to call it, a skill that they target in the draft and hope that maybe there's a player available in the first round that's a little bit more ready than AJ Epinesa was in that weird pandemic year to help as a rookie. But yeah, I think on the other side of that coin, you took AJ Epinesa in the second round last year to be a pass rusher. So I do think you need to at least give him the opportunity to prove his worth. And to a lesser extent, Ed Oliver, who has provided some pass rush at points in his career, but hasn't been the dominant interior rusher that he was expected to be, an Aaron Donald type player. And I think you have to hope and put him in position to try to be that player this season. And if you're not able to add players to the roster, developing your recent draft picks and the players you already have becomes that much more important to getting better next season.
How much do we think Star Latulile's mere presence, just the fact that he's back, what kind of chain reaction might that have on the defensive line? And any kind of meaningful impact it could have on the edge rushers doing their jobs?
I wouldn't bank on it being a fix. I don't know that you can bank 100% on him at all. I don't, nobody's heard from him, publicly in, over a year. Does he still want to play football? We don't know that for sure. Is he going to be any good after a year off? We don't know that. So, and even when he was on the field last, I don't think he was a game changer for this team. Probably slightly overpaid at his position. A good player, a good guy to have, somebody that, helps fix that problem of the interior run defense. If he's playing the way he was in 2019 when he last played, but counting on him to be a fix is probably not the strategy you want to go with. Now, they're bringing back a group that got better as the season went along, but still fell well short of the price tag that most of those guys were being paid. They lost Quentin Jefferson, who was fine at times, generated some pass rush. He graded out well in that ESPN pass rush win rate statistic, but didn't turn it into a lot of sacks. Mario Addison's back at a cheaper contract. He's going to be 34 this year. Jerry Hughes will be 33, I believe, at the start of the season. So those guys aren't getting any younger. I think the real
Darla Tulele, for the record, is 31. He turns 32 in December, so he'll be almost 32 this season, or 32 by the end of the season, I guess is.
So I think, interior pressure is probably your spot, right? If Ed Oliver gets better, that might be enough to change this pass rusher. Like Jonah mentioned, drafting another guy or signing somebody cheap that can be maybe like a situational pass rusher, not an every down guy. You're not going to find probably an immediate impact like that at 30, but maybe you do. Or maybe you find a linebacker that can do what Lorenzo Alexander did, and you find another way to create a pass rush that way. But it's still a problem, and it's one that they now have a lot fewer resources to use to fix it.
I would think that Star Latulier coming back helps the run defense a lot more than the pass rush on that line, and that could have some sort of ripple effect as to who else they use on the line, and maybe that does open up pass rush lanes for different people because of the personnel groupings. But also, the Bills seem to figure something out with blitzing more and blitzing with different guys in the second half of last season, and they discovered a pass rush that didn't come from the front four. So I don't know if you can live on that for another full season. You probably do need to be able to pressure the quarterback with just your 4 linemen rushing. But, not just Ed Oliver. Harrison Phillips is a guy that's supposed to be in his skill set, that maybe you can say he was coming off an injury last year and wasn't at full strength, but you still want to see him be better than he is, and Ed Oliver be better than he is, even though they've both been contributors early on in their career. And maybe there's more that they can get out of Tremaine Edmonds if he's healthier, and Matt Milano and guys blitzing, that they can get a better pass rush without having a 12, 14 sack guy coming off the edge, which is the easiest way to generate a pass rush.
Yeah, I think it's a position that it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's almost like quarterback in that you can't force it. They know they have to address it. They know they need younger players. They've got 2 older veterans that are kind of stopgaps on the edge for them right now. You almost have to be picking high in the order to find the type of athlete that now, that can become a 10 sack a year kind of guy that you're talking about, Jonah. I mean, later on in the draft, teams have found those guys and developed those players. It happens, but that's one of the positions that high draft picks correlate to success a lot more often, like quarterback. So I wonder, to Jonah's point, if it'll have to be scheme stuff that gets them by for a little while, like another linebacker entering into the blitzing mix, or, finding different ways to bring extra pressure, because otherwise they're banking on development on their own roster. And you could say Ed Oliver is probably the primary candidate. AJ Epinesa would be a candidate there if he becomes what they thought they were getting in the second round. And maybe Daryl Johnson, a guy, the 7th round pick that they've been developing. He's got some talent. They like him. But that's a 7th round pick. Banking on him is tough. So, you can also try to throw a dart here in free agency at somebody who's been underutilized. I think bringing back Matt Milano is, and obviously locking up Micah Hyde is sort of the start of their defensive approach here this offseason, but feels like there's more work to be done considering what happened against the Chiefs.
Yeah. What else is to be done? Or I know that you and Joe Buscaglia put together a piece at The Athletic, taking a look at kind of a mock, I don't want to cross up all the different coverage that you guys have been doing. There was a mock off season. There was a free agency synopsis. There was a mock draft. There was, okay. So what's the way too early forecast on March 15th of based on what we've seen the Bills do in free agency so far and how much money they have left, what do the Bills do with their first round pick? So many variables at play, especially at 30. You don't know what's going to be available. You don't know if somebody falls to you surprisingly. I know this is early, but what's the need?
It's a really interesting year for the draft because normally, everything you said is true. Handicapping the 30th pick is impossible most years. It feels even more impossible this year because all these prospects, some of them played half schedules, some of them did not play. There was no combine. Teams played screwy schedules. It was just a weird college football year, like everything else, which I think makes this draft even more variable in terms of. I got a few weeks ago, I did a roster projection and threw some draft picks in there, and some people were worked up about there's no way they'll get all of these guys. To which it's like, okay, maybe that's true, but if we're going with no way this happens in the 2021 draft, I'm not even entertaining those words because who the hell knows what'll happen in this draft? Some guy that somebody thinks is a first round pick, somebody else has him graded as a third round pick or a fourth round pick. It's all over the place because of lack of information. But I think the needs and the philosophy are easier to kind of zone in on, especially now that they brought these guys back. Before it was looking like offensive tackle and linebacker might be primary needs, but I don't know that you spend your first round pick on that after you locked up your starting right tackle and Matt Milano at linebacker. So I think cornerback, number 2 corner is a pretty glaring need on the roster as we sit here right now. Dane Jackson, they want him to compete for a job, but they have not tendered Levi Wallace, who's a restricted free agent. They'll probably try to bring him back if they can, but he's a guy that could, probably get a job somewhere, given all the snaps that he's played the last few years. So that looks like a spot to me, probably a spot they'll look for a veteran as well. Easy spot to find a cheap veteran. They've done that before. And I still think, offensive line has to be in the mix because of what we talked about, not really their strength last year, and finding some depth and developing it. If you want a guy to start for you at guard or tackle or whatever, they've gone the route of developing these guys. So why not take one, let them develop behind Feliciano or Daryl Williams? They can get out of those contracts fairly easily. So I think that's a spot. And edge rusher. I mean, if they can find one at 30, that seems like a no-brainer. There's quite a few edge rushers available. Look, I know people will bring up running back. It's the sexy pick. It's something, everybody wants a first-round running back, but I don't know. I can't wrap my head around the idea. Maybe they do it. Maybe they look at, like the Chiefs last year and say, we're a playmaker away, and they justify it as, this playmaker that's available at 30 is going to put the offense over the top. But you spend third-round picks on Devin Singletary and Zach Moss in consecutive years, and then spend a first-round pick on a running back. I think that how do you split up the carries? Brandon Beane has been slow to admit mistakes in the draft. In fact, I don't know that he's done it at all, given what we're seeing with the offensive line with Cody Ford. Not to say that he's definitively made any mistakes, but he hasn't, he's let things develop and he's given guys time. Do we think he's going to essentially discard 2 third-round picks to take a running back in the first round and give that guy the carries that a first-round pick would warrant? I don't know, but I could see a playmaker. I could see a tight end or a receiver if they think, the right receiver could come in and be a kick returner and, be a guy that they can put the ball in his hands and he can be another playmaker. I'm just not really, even with everything happening, I'm still not really on the running back trade in the first round.
Jonah, I saw you shaking your head as soon as he mentioned running back.
Right. Well, and Matt explained it exactly as I would. I don't think there's any chance that they draft a first-round running back after investing 2 third-round picks in running backs that are still on the team. And I think they played well enough that you can't give up on them right away, especially if you're the GM that just drafted them. Also, you have a quarterback that runs a lot. They like to do the sweep plays with Isaiah McKenzie. I don't think that drafting a first-round running back and rebuilding the whole running game around this new player is in the cards for this team. And I think I also like what Matt mentioned about wide receiver. John Brown, they might not have needed him as a starting receiver, and he was injured for a lot of the seasons, but they did need his speed. And the receivers they have coming back aren't as fast as John Brown was. And I do think if there's an opportunity to add speed on the outside in any of the rounds, that the Bills should really be looking into that, adding that skill to their offense.
They use 4 receiver sets more often than every team besides the Cardinals last year. Used 3 receiver sets frequently. I mean, you could argue that another receiver is more important to the offense than a running back for sure. Speed, like you mentioned, Jonah, is something that showed up in the AFC Championship game, on the other side of the ball, and something that the Bills are probably well aware of with the quarterback that they have and the other weapons, that they have on offense, having a speed threat, because not only John Brown, but Isaiah McKenzie is still unsigned. Probably their 2 fastest receivers from a year ago aren't going to be potentially won't be on the roster. We'll see what happens with McKenzie. So,
and so they're going to need a new kick returner now, probably, because both of their kick and punt returners.
Yeah, their primary guy and their backup, if they don't bring back McKenzie, I would say his value in the building got a little higher with Roberts leaving, but he also got a pretty good audition in week 17. And I'm sure there were some teams out there that liked what they saw. So, yeah, I think a speedy receiver, Kadarius Toney, that the receiver from Florida, might be gone by 30, who knows? But, having watched a little bit of him and read what Dane Brugler writes about him, I view a player in that type of mold, a guy that can play in the slot, a guy that can move around. You can run the jet sweeps or whatever, but I think you make a great point, Jonah, about Josh Allen running the ball. All the factors that siphon carries away from their running backs and value away from their running backs in some ways, because, there's only so many carries to go around. Think about the games in which one of those guys was a workhorse. They were pretty much non-existent except for a drive here and there. They're such a passing team, in addition to their quarterback being such a running threat, that unless they really want to blow the running game up and say start from scratch, or they're really trying to be more balanced and take away from that passing game and add more carries, and they're willing to do that, this isn't the Ravens. The Ravens have this option attack and they run the ball like crazy. They can justify early picks and running backs. Maybe a second round pick the Bills could justify, but a first round pick for a team that has some long-term, not immediate needs, not like glaring, crazy weaknesses on their roster, but certainly some needs in terms of organizational depth and long-term development. And they went last year, didn't have a first round pick. Yes, they used it to get perhaps the best player on their team in Stephon Diggs, but that cheap rookie contract, that 5-year deal, is really valuable. To spend it on a running back when you've already got 2 of them in house, I think is, I don't know, not for me. And I don't expect it to be for the Bills either.
And nobody's going to pound the table for a running back. Brian Dable, I don't think, is going to say we need a star running back. Sean McDermott's going to want to draft defensive players as often as possible early in the draft. So I just don't see a scenario where the Bills feel like we need to get a running back in this round.
It's plausible that they've fallen out of love with Devin Singletary. That could be certainly possible, right? It's been a couple of years. He's a 3rd round pick, but didn't have a great year. I could see that, but they just drafted Zach Moss in the 3rd round, and Zach Moss had a good year when they gave him the ball. He's, somebody that they liked so much that they were trying to trade up for him last year. So they were willing and ready.
They also benched him in the AFC Championship game.
Sure, but the people that drafted him.
Or wait, or am I confusing him and Devin Singletary? Now I'm blending.
No, Moss, he fumbled.
It was Moss who dropped the pass, right?
Not in Moss was hurt for the AFC Championship.
Right.
game.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it was Singletary because they used TJ Yeldon.
Yeah. So that's why I say, I could.
My bust.
Sorry,
Zach Moss.
All right, friend of the show, and here you are saying he was benched while he was probably under the knife.
There was a game where he got benched for fumbling.
He
wasn't there?
did. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the San Francisco game. He fumbled right near the goal line. They gave him the ball back the next week. And I believe the next week was the Steelers game when he had the long drive that Tim wrote about at the Athletic. It seems way too early for them to give up on a guy like that. Singletary, if you're saying, oh, maybe they're ready to give up on Singletary, that I could see. So maybe, I guess, take a running back in the second round or whatever and find a
You
trade
have to go
partner
back
for
one
Singletary.
game to find Sean McDermott being so upset with Devin Singletary that he went with a guy who wasn't necessarily given a uniform on a weekly basis.
And is also a free agent. So,
Yeah.
Not a guy they were clamoring to bring back either. Take a running back by all means. Take one in the first round. I don't know. Seems a bit much. They were ready to.
That's what Ralph Wilson would do. Led the NFL in drafting running backs for years and years and years. In fact, probably at his death, if you'd go back to even when O.J. Simpson was on the team, Ralph loved to draft running backs. Just didn't care about the quarterback position too much. In fact, it wasn't until E.J. Manuel that the Bills drafted a quarterback with their first pick of a draft. Jim Kelly was a first-round pick, but they drafted Tony Hunter 2 spots ahead of him. So J.P. Lossman, of course, was a first-round pick, but wasn't their first pick in that draft. Anyways,
Ralph's not making this pick, right?
no, I don't think so.
Ralph Kruger, he might have.
I can't get it confirmed, but I want to take this opportunity, fellas, to let everybody know that Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by Shampoo Travis Beeson Kirshner. People might hear that CTBK and occasionally wonder what it is. It stands for Shampoo Travis Beeson Kirshner. They're CPAs and business consultants, and they're based in Amherst, New York. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst. And CTBK will pair every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. CTBK. Over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond. I want to switch now to the Buffalo Sabres. I really don't know if there's anything more to say that hasn't been said. They've lost a couple of more games. They have now lost 10 in a row. These most recent losses are to be expected because they're playing against really good teams, the Pittsburgh Penguins, most notably here. Or most recently, I should say. Another game this evening against the Pittsburgh Penguins. So, at least in Las Vegas, I'm guessing that the odds are that the Sabres are expected to lose an 11th straight game tonight. Ralph Kruger still has not been fired. At this stage, it doesn't look like he will be, because how much more embarrassing for the Pagulas can it get? How much more embarrassing are 18 straight losses compared to 10 straight losses? Not a lot, I don't think. I think at some point it's, I guess, diminishing returns. When once you've lost 10, how much more humiliating is it to lose 3 more or 5 more? No help seems to be on the way. There have been players waived around the NHL that could have been picked up. There's now COVID problem in Rochester to where players can't be called up. I don't know.
Jack Eichel's hurt.
Right. Well, that. Jack Eichel out for the, quote, foreseeable future, unquote, whatever that means.
Dylan Cousins got banged up there too.
Dylan Cousins, Rasmus Dahlin took a leg-to-leg hit or a knee-to-knee hit. There was
Carter
no
Hutton finally
pushback.
played a good game.
Yeah, Carter Hutton did play a good game, but I guess maybe let's they're boiling the blood is a nice comment. It sounds great. Ralph Kruger had that to say after the first Penguins loss, in which Cousins and Dahlin were injured, and why there was no response, with flashbacks to Paul Gaustad standing there while Ryan Miller looked like the crumpled heap of Beetle Bailey after Sarge got through with him 10 years ago, or however long ago that was. And then there was no response. So Ralph Kruger saying they're boiling the blood. We're cooking up a response to the Penguins in our next game. Well, they had the rematch and nothing happened. I don't know. I'll just open it up for you guys if you have any comments on the Sabres. Is there anything to discuss that gets you, what's on top of your minds?
I mean, nothing. I try to think about the Sabres as little as I can. I am covering the games Thursday and Saturday, but I'm spending a lot more time thinking about the New Jersey Devils and the Boston Bruins, and probably writing about the team that wins that game and not the Buffalo Sabres. On the other hand, they do play the New Jersey Devils tomorrow night, which is a possibly winnable game. I mean, it seems it's a team they've beaten already this season. It seems like a team they play.
Those games are
against.
Toss-ups. It goes back and forth between those two.
They actually play Washington tonight, which is a tough game. They've lost to them a few times, but they did have one win earlier in the season with Jack Eichel and when they were playing better. But I don't think that if you're
is it Washington tonight? I said Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it's Washington tonight. But
okay, I'm sorry. Washington tonight.
But the point remains, not a easy game.
Not a winnable. Yeah, still
right.
A game they're not supposed to win.
But I don't think if you're a Sabres fan that's turned to maybe rooting for them to lose because, as you said, how many games can they lose in a row before the coach gets fired? I don't think he's going to get fired, at least in this winning streak. I think everybody involved in that decision is probably digging their heels in. They're not going to, fall victim to the media and fan pressure. And I don't know what's going to happen going into next season, but they seem to be pretty resolute in riding out this wave that they're on right now, no matter how bad it gets.
I think that's true. I think there's really nothing that can be done to spark this team. You fire Ralph Kruger. I guess that in and of itself might wake the team up for a little bit. Maybe they get excited to play for whoever they bring in, or they just, promote one of the assistants. Hell, go with Kyle Okposo or Eric Stahl. Make Eric Stahl the player coach. Like, let's do throwback to the 50s and have a player coach, and maybe it wakes the guys up, or whoever the backup goalie is for the night. He can stand behind the bench and help with the lines and stuff.
In his gear.
In his full, absolutely, because he has to be ready in case he's needed. It would make for a nice photo, but I think
suit
that
on top, goalie pads on bottom.
Right, like the episode of The Office when Michael Scott was wearing his halfway inflated sumo costume because he was doing the fat man, his fat man character. And put the suit on top of the goalie pads. And I think that it's not going to matter. So my belief, and this is like reading tea leaves, is that Kruger's done, but with quarantine rules and all the different things, they're going to want to pick from the most available coaches. We discussed it on a previous podcast that maybe it's better for them to not have as many options as possible. Maybe it's better if they are just limited to the couple who are available right now, so that way they don't mess it up. But anyways, it just seems, I think there are a lot of people that after each loss think, well, that's got to be the one that cost Ralph Kruger his job. I think it's going to have to get something really embarrassing is going to have to happen. Like Ralph Kruger decides to play 7 minutes of the third period without a goaltender, or he pulls a Norman Dale from Hoosiers and goes with 4 skaters and tells the ref, my team's on the ice.
You have to be defiant in some way.
Yeah, there's going to have to be some sort of,
or
the players refuse to play. Somebody quits in the middle of a game. We have a Vontae Davis situation. I don't know. But I think
players get really vocal and it starts to become, because as it stands right now, they had a pretty turbulent few weeks in the early part of this losing streak where there was embarrassing moment after embarrassing moment, whether it was crisscrossed communication or, all these different things with Ralph Kruger, and Kevin Adams had to come out and talk. And my sense since then is that this has become a much quieter stretch of losing for them. Like after that, they were the center of attention. Everybody was just watching every screw up, and now they've kind of faded back into the background. Free agency's happening with the Bills. People are talking about that. And if you fire Ralph Kruger, you've got to have your new coach quarantined for 2 weeks, unless you hire one of his assistants. And there's less than 2 months left in the season. So I think like you, Tim, I kind of think they're sitting there saying, look, Ralph, just go out there for the next 2 months and don't completely embarrass us. Don't do beyond just the losing. Of course, that's embarrassing in and of itself. Like the 10-game he could lose every other game as long as he does it quietly and, without any outward displays of complete chaos. If it's just subtle, ineptitude, I think that can fly until early May when the season ends, and they can just get the whole thing over with at that point.
I don't want to say that they are tanking or necessarily recommend tanking, but at this point in the season, with the record they have and the injuries and the players they have, if you bring in, say, a Ted Nolan type and he rallies the team and they bring up a bunch of minor leaguers and they play harder and they win some extra games and they get a higher draft choice or a lower draft choice because of that, is that really what you want? And who are you doing that for? Just to satisfy, the reporters on the conference calls that are saying, we need to see something. We need to see results. I just don't think that there's really much to be gained.
A lot of shade being thrown on today's Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK.
Well, no, I mean, I'm just saying.
I started it off. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I like how it's carrying through.
Yeah, that would be the reason why you would fire the coach at this point, is because the fans and vocal segments of the media are insisting that you have to. And I just don't know what's to be gained by doing that at this point in this type of season.
I think what's to be gained is, there's a good chunk of this roster, the hope would be not a sizable chunk, but a decent amount of these guys could be back. And I think what you gain potentially is people roll their eyes at, culture or whatever else. But I think if you ever want to be a winning team, at some point you have to establish that. At some point, guys need to figure out how to win, figure out what it feels like to play hard. These guys that have lost and only lost, Ristolainen, Eichel, now Cousins, Dahlin, Middlestat, Sam Reinhart, those guys are probably all mostly coming back. And, I guess what more does 2 months of losing do to them that these other years haven't done? But maybe some sort of shot in the arm could be developed with the right coach. Not a reason to do it, especially if it's not a coach that's going to carry over and you're going to bring them back. I think that's where it becomes a little silly. And yeah, you do probably ruin your draft position and everything else, but there would be something to be gained from firing your coach and ripping off some wins and having some good mojo going. Problem is, I don't know if they have the talent for it. Jack Eichel's hurt. They seem destined to lose these games regardless of who's behind the bench. So the quarantine rules and everything else kind of just makes it justifiable in some ways to sit there and just say, ride it out. If anything, and you got to fire Ralph and have somebody come up from Rochester and coach the team, or an assistant if you have to get to that point. But hiring your permanent replacement at this point seems like it might be tough. But like I said, if you're picking between Claude Julien and Bruce Boudreau, your batting average or your chances of hitting there is probably just as good as if you wait until after the season, expand your pool, and hire some college coach or something. So,
but with either of those two guys, you're just going for experience because they have been fired a lot. between the
But
two
they
of
haven't
them.
tried that. They haven't really tried
True.
that route.
That's right.
You know?
It's been Ron Ralston. Well, they did with Ted Nolan. They did the retread with Ted Nolan with the LaFontaine Nolan
and
tandem.
Dan Bilesma was
Yeah.
So it's not that they haven't tried it, but the last two coaches, that wasn't the thing. So it's
Right.
like, but also this idea, I think there's also a problem of treating this coach as whoever you hire as like your Sean McDermott. But you can't, it's not like football. Like, go hire Bruce Boudreau, and if in next October, your team sucks, fire him and get somebody else. Teams do it all the time. I mean, Claude Julien just got fired from a good hockey team. So treating these guys as these permanent, long-term, fixtures can be a bit of a like, oh, he needs some time to turn this around. Like, it's just not entirely true. I don't think the revolving door in hockey is as much of a problem as it is when you try to do it in football.
I think it is when you have so much already invested is a bad word because I guess they were just bad investments. When you were already paying out so many people not to work for you, as
Money
the
is a
Sabres
problem
are. And it's a team that loses a lot of money, especially when hockey teams are like that. And if you don't make the playoffs, you're not going to turn a profit, with the exception of a couple. So it's difficult. What about and we'll wrap it up on this, and I want to talk some basketball, but what about the idea of, and I guess it goes to what Jonah was saying before, just not to appease the fans or people or the media who are banging the drum to do so. And maybe there isn't much community goodwill left to worry about losing. But that's the one thing. It's like every day, every game, every loss, or every day that Ralph Kruger is still the coach, there seems to be that much more of an erosion of any interest in the Sabres. And as we all know, anger is a better emotion for your fans to be feeling than apathy. And it just seems as that the more this drags on, is that it's off into oblivion. Is there a reason maybe for that, just to yank fans, and yank them back and say, look, hey, we do care? Is there anything to be done or anything to be said for that kind of maneuver?
Perhaps. It would be a short-term thing anyways, right? Like, I guess it shows a little bit more that they care than it would at the end of the season. But yeah, there's a message that could be sent, but it's a question of, would you rather that and then people are talking about you again, or is that general state of apathy okay for a couple of months? Are you okay letting that wind its way, run its course here, and then firing the guy? Because there's not going to be a lot to be, what happens if you fire the coach in the next 4 games, they come out flat and they don't play well and they lose anyways? How much goodwill do you have then? So I think they've lost all those maneuvers. They're out of those moves, those short-term, good for the fan base, good for PR. I think they've run out of every card that they could play at this point. The only thing to do is to get better. And so if they think waiting to fire Ralph Kruger will give them a better chance to get the guy that can fix it, then that's probably what they should do, regardless of what the fan base thinks, because they're not winning over the fan base by doing the obvious and firing Ralph Kruger. The only way they're ever going to win any of these people back is to win hockey games. Like, that's it. At this point, it's been so long that nobody is going to get excited by anything, I don't think, because why would they? They've gotten excited by so much. Jack Eichel and Evander Kane and Ryan O'Reilly and Robin Lehner, and then it was Rasmus Dahlin. Like, they got this number 1 pick, and then Dan Bilesma, and then it was Jason Botterill was going to fix everything, and Ralph Kruger was this. They've gotten excited. Maybe there's some people out there that have it in them to get excited again, but I don't think firing Ralph Kruger is going to get anybody excited. It's such an obvious move at this point that feels like the only way to win these people back is to actually win games. The only time I've seen this town legitimately fired up about hockey since I moved here in 2014. Of course, people were excited. There's times that I think of that they've been fired up. The draft in 2015, the draft when Rasmus Dahlin went number 1, people were pretty excited. And that 10-game winning streak. The only on-ice thing that's actually gotten people excited was that winning streak. Go do that, and maybe people will buy in. I hear people talk about this team, and you were talking about how people rooted against them during the tank years for the sake of the team. Now it feels like people are rooting against them because they legitimately don't like them. Like they're legitimately so sick of them that they're just laughing at what's happening. And it's like a defense mechanism where people don't even want to see them win because it's like now they want the coach fired. And
yeah, I think
I don't even know what it is.
Every loss gets them one step closer to blowing it up. And I think they want it blown up. And
I'm more curious what happens if they start winning. If maybe they can get hot in April or at the finish on a nice 10-game run, does that save Ralph Kruger's job? Does that save a lot of the roster construction and make people think, or make the organization think, they can go into next year with largely the same group and be competitive?
I think we're beyond that.
How dangerous.
I mean, that's what I'm wondering. Is that out of the?
And then you
question
could
to
sell
think
it
that
as,
they
look,
could
they
turn
were
this
finally
around?
picked. They finally absorbed the system. They're finally buying in. They're finally
COVID
listening.
year.
Jack Eichel's finally healthy. Like maybe it's a point where in the goaltending, if they get to one of these stretches where we only had our number 1 goaltender and a healthy Jack Eichel for the last 3 weeks of the season, and look how good we were in those 3 weeks, I could see that being a justification to run it back with this group for next year.
Yeah, I could get there, but based on what I'm seeing on the ice, I can't fathom those same players playing in any way, in any meaningful way. I think they've tuned out the coach, and they are already in their minds playing out the string of the season. They want to go home. They want to get on a bass boat and go fishing. They want to jump in their golf carts.
But they
Whatever.
also seem to like this coach, other than maybe Jeff Skinner. They seem to like not having the morning skates and the way he talks to the media without really calling them out individually. I think it's been sort of reported that Jack Eichel and the players like Ralph Kruger more than they've liked the previous.
But then Jack Eichel contradicted him publicly over the injury.
There was that. But I don't necessarily think Jack Eichel's gotten coaches fired before. So you would think if Jack Eichel wants a new coach, there might be a new coach here.
Well, we'll see what happens with Jack Eichel at the trade deadline too. But I mean, I know that would be the nuclear option.
I think it would be malpractice if I owned the Buffalo Sabres to let this general manager with no help, with no lieutenants and a coach who is sort of his co-GM, but is a coach swimming in boiling water, to make the decision to trade Jack Eichel right now. I mean, I think you have to hire a GM and a coach just to make the right evaluation on trading Jack Eichel and what he's worth.
Could you imagine Gary Bettman stepping in and saying, no, you're not allowed to do this trade? Yeah.
David Stern would.
Right?
Like the commissioner of your
David Stern has, right?
Stepping in saying, no, this is collusion.
Unless, you could also look at it like maybe the NHL wants Jack Eichel on a team that wins and is going to be playing on.
Yeah, get one of their star players out of this swamp that is downtown Buffalo, or at least the arena anyway. Let's talk about college basketball before we wrap it up here. Obviously, very interesting weekend of Western New York basketball. University of Buffalo gets to the Mid-American Conference Final. I don't know what the point spread was in that game. They had lost by 1 point to Ohio early in the season, and I think won by 20, maybe a week or two before that, before facing Ohio University in the final.
That's correct.
But Ohio University was tearing through the MAC. They were scoring a lot of points, and I think that they are just peaking at the perfect time, and UB really didn't have much answer. They seemed frustrated for a good chunk of the game. Very early on, of course, they dug a big hole and just couldn't get out of it. And then, of course, well, let's just stay with that one, and then we'll touch on the other teams. What are your thoughts on UB ending its regular season and not being able to advance for a third straight NCAA tournament?
Well, oh, you mean not three? Well, I actually think UB had a very good year. They're playing in the NIT, which is a little bit of a surprise with the way the NIT was constructed and what.
Yeah, that was going to be a follow-up question. I think that,
but I also think winning, what was it, 7 in a row, or 10 to 12, however they got, I think it was more than 7, to get to that final game was an excellent finish to the season. They were the hottest team in the league with Ohio going into that final game, and they played a terrible first half. They scored 21 points in the first half. They had about, they were behind on points per minute. They were less than a point per minute for most of the first half. It had been 6 years since they had any half when they were that bad offensively, and they fell down by 20 points, and that's way too much to come back from. It was a poor performance. Jason Preston, the Ohio point guard, had a great game, and Buffalo's point guard, Ronaldo Segu, had one of his worst games of the season. I think that matchup and the 16-0 run that Ohio went on early in the game decided the entire game, no matter what just about anybody else on UB's roster or bench could do about it. But you take that half and that game out of it, they played great for most of the second half of the season after coming out of their COVID pause and getting healthy. They're still playing in the NIT, which isn't what everybody, the NCAA tournament is the goal, but this is only the second time and the first time in 16 years that UB's been in the NIT with a reduced field. So I think it's a bit
more of an honor this year, right?
Yeah, and there were teams like Duke and other teams that apparently reportedly turned down invitations, but it's still, I think when you balance both of that together, equal to being invited to play in the NIT and any other year. And when you are invited to play in the NIT, that means you're about a top 100 team, top third of Division I. It's kind of equivalent to the bowl games that UB football gets invited to. So I think that it was a very good season. It fell short of what this UB team did a couple years back, but aside from that, it's almost as good as any other UB season that they had before this recent run when they were a top 25 team. So I think that, I wouldn't be too disappointed if I was a Buffalo fan with how this season played out.
Yeah, I thought that was a pleasantly surprising development if you are a UB Bulls fan to see them invited to the NIT and to be able to continue their season, because it's the NIT or nothing. Those other minor tournaments don't exist this year. So that's a fairly pleasant consolation.
It's a different NIT. They're going down to play in Frisco, Texas, where normally first round NIT games are on campus, which is usually the cool thing about a local team making the NIT. Sometimes they get a home game out of it. And if you get to the finals, you get to go play in MSG, which is a cool thing. And that won't happen this year. But still being able to put up an NIT banner. In some schools, they don't put up NIT banners. But I think Buffalo is the type of program, a Mid-American Conference program, that would be proud to put that up with their other NIT and NCAA banners in the gym.
And it shows a streak too, which I think just from banner purposes, if you were to put it up there as just an NIT and that's all you got, or if you got a bunch of NITs, then a recruit might walk in there and say, well, this isn't for me. But you have these NCAA banners and then an NIT, it shows consistency, especially in a conference like the Mid-American, where you only get one bid and you can show and look at, it doesn't stop. Like we keep going. Like we didn't win the conference this year, but we were right there.
Especially if they can win some game in the NIT and make a run and maybe be semifinalists. I'm not so sure they will, but if they can, then that even adds to what they were able to accomplish this season.
St. Bonaventure did win its conference and then the tournament. Mark Schmidt, no longer a candidate for Boston College. BC filled its vacancy today, so maybe people will stop talking about that for the time being, and the St. Bonaventure can focus on its first round matchup on Saturday. What are your thoughts on Bonaventure? They're the 9th seed going up against LSU. I think it's KenPom says that St. Bonaventure's the favorite, right?
1 point favorite because they're rated higher on KenPom and it's a neutral site game. Yeah, they're a top 25 team on KenPom, and LSU, I think, is at 29. And so that, in those calculations, puts Bonner as the favorite. I don't think they're going to be the betting favorite, nor are they the seeding favorite. And LSU is a team that a lot of people think is underseeded. So it's a tough matchup for Bonner in the first round. But they're playing great. They're playing better than they have. They keep getting better as the season goes along, especially through the conference tournament on neutral courts. They took care of the, if they're the best team, they took care of the second and third best team handily in the semifinals and the final. And they're, as a 9 seed, this is the second highest seed that any Western New York team has had in the modern 64, 68 team tournament. UB was a 6 seed a couple years ago when they were nationally ranked. And beyond that, everybody's always been double-digit seeds, whether an 11 or a 12 for Bonner or UB, or Canisius and Niagara are always going to be lower than that when they make it. So this is, if not, this is one of the best college basketball seasons in 50 years, along with that UB run a couple years ago. And they have a chance to do what that UB team did, which is win a first-round game and advance to the next round. It probably would be against number 1 seed Michigan, which would be a really tough opportunity to go to the Sweet 16. But with a team full of juniors, the way they're playing, I think that it's kind of found money at this point just being in the NCAA tournament. But if they can win a game or two, then it becomes, one of the best seasons in St. Bonaventure history.
What's going on with Damon? Damon, obviously, both men and women's programs have been fantastic this year. Give us a preview of those two programs, if you would.
Both Damon basketball teams have won an NCAA tournament game in the Division II NCAA tournament for the first time in the, I guess you would say 7 years, but 6 seasons because there was no tournament last year. Last year was the first year that they both qualified for the tournament, and they're probably both a little bit better last year than they were this year. It was a little bit easier to get in this year, and they're seated higher with, lower records than they had a year ago. But they both won their first round games. The Damon women won their game at home. They play a regional final game tonight at 6 on their home floor, have a chance to be in the Elite Eight, the national quarterfinals, if they win tonight against a team that they've beaten in the regular season, Roberts Wesleyan. And the Damon men, they're the number 2 seed playing tomorrow in Albany against the number 1 seed, St. Thomas Aquinas, which is a team that they're now playing for the 4th time this season. They beat them once. They lost twice, including in the conference title game, but they were mostly competitive games all 3 ways. So Damon men have an opportunity to also win that game and get to the next round of the tournament, it's further than they've ever been already, but getting to it, the Division II tournament's almost like 2 tournaments. You start in a regional and then everybody goes to an 18 tournament, and being, whether it's men or women, being in that final 8 is quite an accomplishment for a relatively new Division II program.
Yeah, it's Damon has built something really special there. Its entire athletic department, really, they've done a lot of pretty cool things.
It's big for Damon hosting this tournament, on the women's side,
right?
The exposure that they get and being, if this goes well, in Division II you host the regional when you're the number 1 seed in most years, but there'll be other opportunities in different ways that Damon can host NCAA events, and doing this during the pandemic with these conditions, if it goes well, we'll give them the opportunity to maybe do it again.
All right. That's a wrap. That's a spin around Western New York sports. Sorry, we don't have time to talk Bisons today, Matthew. I know that you had some thoughts on Casey Candell as the manager and how much you used to love to watch him sprint to first base after a walk.
There's plenty of time for that. Plenty of time for baseball takes. We're almost there. Almost.
Casey Candell, do you remember him at all as a player?
I don't. The name sounds vaguely familiar, but
Montreal Expo, which dates him in and of itself.
Montreal Expos when did they stop being a thing? 2004. Yeah, so I was 12 years old.
Well, we're talking Casey Candell played in the 80s. That's when he came in. I don't know how long he lasted. I have to go back and look, but
point being, there's not many Expos I do remember other than the Vlad Guerreros of the world. But good times nonetheless.
Broadcasters used to go nuts because look at this guy hustle. He'd walk and sprint to first base. And they would, the TV pro, whatever show he was on, they would show it. Usually a guy walks, they're showing who's coming up from on deck. They're taking a look at the bullpen. No, it was the camera just would follow him all the way because he was hustling. Casey Candell and Sean McDermott are going to get along great.
You could say he was kind of like the Patriots here in the opening of free agency. They are hustling to get some deals done.
If you're not going to have a good quarterback, you got to make up for it somewhere.
As we've been recording this, the Patriots have spent about $146 million in total contracts with some big names: Jonnu Smith, Matt Judon, Jalen Mills. Among them are Jeff Howe at The Athletic reporting that they're also in the market for a receiver and making some various pushes that way. So
how about John Brown?
A busy day for them.
Why would you bother? I mean, the Bills already won free agency.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
After the fact.
They're hustling. They're chasing them. You're seeing two much different approaches to free agency between the Bills and the Patriots here. This is an unfamiliar Patriots approach. We haven't seen it. Somebody tweeted that in the previous 10 years in free agency, they spent $309 million. They're up to $146 million in the first 3 hours here. So that was from Warren Sharp on Twitter. Busy day for New England.
And they still have Cam Newton.
For now.
Well,
do we think he starts?
What happens there.
We'll see. Maybe they
all right, guys.
Better.
Let's reconvene a little later in the week. We'll get more in depth with Bonaventure LSU matchup, and we'll probably have a couple more Sabres losses to talk about. You guys up for it?
I'm into it.
All right. Thanks for tuning in. No, hang on a second. You don't tune into this. What do you do? Thanks for downloading this. Thanks for
listening is the word. Watching.
Okay.
Consuming.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Sorry if I cut you off there, Jonah. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, don't interrupt me anymore.
Hey, thanks everybody for listening so closely. Okay. Thanks, boys. I got to jump on some of these free agent signings.
Yeah, you better.
Otherwise, what do you guys got going on? Well, it might be better if we could do Wednesday instead of Thursday, because I got to cover the Sabres Thursday and some other things. But I also could fit this in Thursday if we did it Thursday.
You prefer when?
It's all the same to you guys. I got, a wide open Wednesday and a bunch of things going on Thursday.
What about Friday?
I could probably also do it Friday too. Yeah.
I'm okay with doing it Wednesday. I just don't know if it's too soon. But if we're going to focus,
I don't think that's a matter if we talk about different things, and you could put it up Thursday morning.
True.
I don't know. I could also make it work Thursday.
I'm going to try to get. All right. How about this?
We get as a guest.
Let's try. I'll try to do. We'll focus on doing it Wednesday. I'm going to try to get Jim Saddlin. He's the Syracuse broadcaster / former Bonaventure coach.
Yeah, but
if he's available.
Last year, he kind of didn't know what he was talking about with Bona. Because I don't think he watches the games. Now, maybe he's been home watching, but we had him on last year, and he was like Syracuse. He knew it all because he covers them. And Bona, he was sort of like, oh, they got those good players. I like that number 12. That's what I remember a little bit. So, I mean, maybe we could do him, but I do remember last year he seemed a little unprepared to talk about the Bonnies. Because
about if we get somebody like Mike Vaccaro?
Well, that's what I was thinking. There's a lot of people we could get.
I'll reach out to Vac. He'd be a good guest. We could talk about all kinds of shit.
Yeah. Or even Sully. I think Sully could
baseball.
be the backup if we don't get anybody else. You just have Sully in.
Okay.
But Vac would be
we'll get somebody for Wednesday. Good idea.
Get back. That would be good.
Okay.
Yeah. Or
I don't have a relationship with Woj, though. I mean,
I could probably get us Tim Wynn. I don't know if you want him, but he's
what's he up to these days?
He lives in North Carolina, but depending on whatever his work schedule is, I think that
Does he
he'd be willing
coach?
to do it. I don't think so. He's got a son that plays baseball. I see that on Facebook a lot. But he's Mr. He's following it. He posts about that and high school stuff. I mean,
Where's Turner Battle these days?
Turner Battle's where is he? Is he still no, he's not still at UAB. He's an assistant somewhere. He got a new gig.
I got a number for him. Okay. Well, we'll get options. Between now and Wednesday, I'll get somebody. We'll talk basketball. All right. Thanks, guys.
East Tennessee State.
East Tennessee. That seems like a step back.
Yeah, well, his coach, they lost the job there. He was trying to get in at UB, but I guess UB only had the bottom salary job, and this one was a higher salary job. That's because his dad or his wife's dad messages me all.
All right. I'll get somebody.
All right.
Thanks, guys. Tim Graham and Friends is brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and business consultants. CTBK is a leading accounting firm with a growing team of accountants and business consultants with roots in Amherst, New York. CTBK pairs every project with a focus on a human connection between its team and the client. For assurance, accounting, taxes, litigation support, and advice on mergers and acquisitions, CTBK is available and ready to solve any issue your business faces. For a consultation or to request a quote, call 716-630-2400. Again, that's 716-630-2400. CTBK, over a quarter century of proven accounting and business excellence for Western New York and beyond.